It was an unusually cold evening. The streets buzzed with people rushing home, eager to escape the biting wind. Among them was Sarah, a young marketing executive, balancing a coffee cup in one hand and her phone in the other. Her mind was consumed with work deadlines and a long list of tasks waiting for her at home. She barely noticed the world around her until she did. Just outside a small café, hunched over a bench, sat a homeless man, his arms wrapped tightly around himself as he shivered. His clothes were worn, his face tired, and his eyes carried a quiet kind of sadness. He wasn't begging, wasn't asking for anything, just sitting there, staring at the pavement as if lost in his thoughts. Sarah hesitated. She had walked past homeless people before, like everyone else in the city. But something about this man made her stop. Maybe it was the way he sat silently, or perhaps it was the exhaustion in his eyes. Whatever it was, she found herself turning back. Stepping inside the cafe, she ordered an extra meal, hot soup, a sandwich, and a cup of coffee. When she walked back outside and placed the meal beside him, the man looked up in surprise. "I thought you could use something warm," she said with a small smile. For a moment, he just stared at the food, as if unsure whether he should take it. Then his lips trembled and his eyes welled up. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Sarah shrugged, trying to brush it off. "It's just a meal." But for him, it was more than that. It was kindness at a time when he had lost faith in people. It was hope when he had none left. As Sarah walked away, she didn't realize she had just changed a life forever. She wouldn't remember this moment for long, but he would. And years later, fate would bring them together again, in a way she never could have imagined. Years passed since that cold evening, and Sarah had nearly forgotten about the encounter. Life had moved forward in its usual, relentless way. She had climbed the corporate ladder, worked long hours, and sacrificed sleep for success. Now in her early 30s, she was a senior executive at a leading marketing firm, managing high-profile clients and multi-million-dollar campaigns. Her life, on the surface, looked perfect. She had a spacious apartment in the city, a wardrobe full of designer clothes, and a salary most people could only dream of. But deep down, she often wondered, was this really the life she wanted? Her job was demanding, filled with constant pressure and impossible expectations. The Sarah who once had dreams of traveling the world and making a real impact had faded into a version of herself that was always too busy, too exhausted. One evening, she sat in her office long after her colleagues had left. The city lights twinkled outside her window as she scrolled through emails, sighing at the never-ending list of demands. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Her assistant, Emily, peeked in. "Hey, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important." Sarah frowned. "Who is it?" Emily hesitated. "He says his name is Daniel Carter." The name meant nothing to Sarah. She almost declined, but something in Emily's expression made her pause. "He asked me to give you this," Emily added, handing her a small, crumpled note. Sarah unfolded it and stared at the words scribbled inside. "Years ago, you bought me a meal. I'd like to return the favor." A strange feeling settled in her chest. A memory stirred. Cold air, a cafe, a tired man with sad eyes. Could it be him? Curious and slightly apprehensive, Sarah nodded. "Send him in." A moment later, the door opened, and a tall man in a tailored suit stepped inside. His posture was confident, his presence commanding, but his eyes, those eyes held something familiar. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as realization struck her like a wave. It was him. The homeless man she had bought a meal for all those years ago was now standing before her, looking nothing like the person she remembered. For a moment, Sarah just stared, struggling to reconcile the image in front of her with the memory in her mind. The man standing in her office was nothing like the frail, shivering figure she had seen years ago. He was tall, well-groomed, dressed in an expensive navy blue suit that fit him perfectly. His beard was neatly trimmed, his posture confident. But his eyes, they were the same. Sarah cleared her throat, trying to regain her composure. "Daniel Carter, right?" she asked hesitantly. He nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. It's been a long time, hasn't it? She gestured toward the chair across from her desk. Please have a seat. As Daniel settled in, Sarah couldn't hold back her curiosity. I have to admit, I wasn't expecting this. The last time I saw you, she hesitated, not wanting to sound offensive. I was homeless, Daniel finished for her, his tone calm and understanding. And you bought me a meal. She smiled faintly. I remember now. Daniel leaned forward slightly. That meal, it wasn't just food to me, Sarah. It was a reminder that kindness still existed, that I wasn't invisible. Sarah felt a strange warmth spread in her chest. She had never thought much of that moment. To her, it had been a small, fleeting act of kindness. But to him, it had meant so much more. Curious, she asked, what happened after that? How did you turn your life around? Daniel exhaled, his expression thoughtful. It wasn't easy. That night, after you left, I sat there staring at that meal for a long time. I had been on the streets for nearly 2 years by then. I had lost everything. My job, my home, my self-worth. But something about your kindness woke me up. I realized I couldn't keep living like that. Sarah listened intently as he continued. I found a homeless shelter that night, Daniel explained. They helped me get back on my feet. I took small jobs, saved every penny I could. Eventually, I managed to enroll in a job training program. It took years, but I slowly rebuilt my life. And now, he chuckled lightly. Now, I run my own company. Sarah's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Wait, you own a company? Daniel nodded. Yes, a startup specializing in digital marketing and branding. She couldn't hide her amazement. The man who once had nothing now owned a business in the same industry she worked in. Fate had a strange way of bringing people full circle. But then Daniel's expression turned serious. There's another reason I came here today, Sarah, he said. I'm not just here to thank you. I have an offer for you. Sarah tilted her head, intrigued. An offer? Daniel nodded. Yes, I know you're one of the best in this industry. I've been following your career for a while, and I want you to come work for me. Sarah blinked, caught off guard. Wait, you're offering me a job? Daniel smiled. Not just any job. I want you to be the chief marketing officer for my company. I need someone with your expertise, your leadership, someone I can trust. Sarah was speechless. Here she was, sitting in her high-rise office, working for one of the most prestigious firms in the industry. And yet, for the first time in a long while, she felt something she hadn't expected. Excitement. Could this be the fresh start she didn't even realize she needed? Sarah sat in stunned silence, staring at Daniel as if she had misheard him. You want me to work for you? She repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. Daniel chuckled. I get that it's unexpected, but yes. I'm offering you a position as my chief marketing officer. Sarah leaned back in her chair, still processing his words. Daniel, I have a stable job here. My career is secure. Why would I leave all of this to take a chance on something new? Daniel didn't hesitate. Because I know you, Sarah. You're brilliant, but you're not happy. His words hit her harder than she expected. She opened her mouth to protest, but something stopped her. Was he right? For years, Sarah had worked tirelessly, climbing the corporate ladder, proving herself in a male-dominated industry. On the surface, she had everything: status, success, financial stability. But deep down, had she lost the passion that once fueled her? Daniel leaned forward. I've been where you are, Sarah, trapped in a cycle that felt impossible to break. But the moment I took a risk, the moment I chose something different, my life changed. Sarah exhaled slowly. Daniel, this is a lot to take in. I know, he said gently. Take your time. But I want you to consider something. What's stopping you? Fear? Comfort? Or is it just the idea that change feels too big? His words stirred something inside her. She thought back to the long nights at the office, the endless meetings, the corporate politics that drained her. She thought about how, despite all her achievements, something always felt missing. And now, here was an opportunity. Not just any opportunity, but one that came from someone whose life had changed because of a small act of kindness she had barely even thought about at the time. She sighed, rubbing her temples. I don't know, Daniel. I need time. Daniel smiled. Of course. But just know this, I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for you. And now I want to give you the same chance you once gave me. His words stayed with her long after he left. That night, Sarah lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mind replayed her conversation with Daniel. His confidence, his passion, the way he spoke about change and risk as if they were necessary parts of growth rather than things to fear. What was she so afraid of? She had spent years making safe choices. But where had that gotten her? Success, yes. But fulfillment? She wasn't so sure anymore. She thought about the younger version of herself, the one who had entered the industry with excitement, ambition, and a hunger to create something meaningful. Would that younger version recognize the woman she had become? The next morning, she made her decision. Sarah stood outside Daniel's office, her heart pounding. She had spent the entire night weighing her options, making lists, trying to find reasons to say no. But in the end, there was only one answer. She knocked, and Daniel's voice called from inside. "Come in." As she stepped into his office, he looked up, his expression unreadable. "Sarah, I wasn't expecting to see you so soon." She took a deep breath. "I've made my decision." Daniel leaned forward slightly, waiting. Sarah met his gaze. "I'm in." For a moment, there was silence. Then, a slow smile spread across Daniel's face. "You won't regret this, Sarah." A small, nervous laugh escaped her lips. "I hope not." But deep down, for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Excitement. Hope. The beginning of something new. Sarah's resignation sent shockwaves through her office. "You're leaving?" Her boss, Mr. Whitman, stared at her, completely dumbfounded. "After all the years you've put into this company." Sarah nodded, her hands clasped in her lap. "Yes, sir. I've been given an opportunity one can't pass up." Whitman leaned back, folding his arms. "Let me guess, you're chasing a dream?" Sarah smiled. "Something like that." He sighed. "I won't lie, Sarah. This company is losing one of its best. But if this is what you really want, I won't stand in your way." 2 weeks later, Sarah found herself in a completely different environment. Gone were the cold, towering corporate walls, the rigid hierarchy, the endless bureaucracy. Daniel's company was smaller, more dynamic, filled with energy and innovation. But it wasn't easy. Despite Daniel's confidence in her abilities, Sarah quickly realized that stepping into this new role wasn't just about transferring her skills. It was about unlearning old habits and adapting to a new way of thinking. She struggled to fit into the culture at first. Decisions were made quickly. Ideas were challenged. People moved fast. Unlike her previous job, where formality was key, here collaboration was everything. She was used to long approval chains and careful, calculated risks. But here, she was expected to take initiative, to trust her instincts, to act. It was overwhelming. After her first month, she sat in her office exhausted. Daniel knocked on the door. "Rough day." Sarah exhaled, rubbing her temples. "You could say that." He leaned against the doorframe. "Let me guess. You feel like you're not catching up fast enough." She looked at him, surprised. "How did you?" "Because I went through the same thing," he said with a knowing smile. "Corporate life conditions you to think a certain way. When you step into something different, it feels like you're starting from scratch." Sarah nodded. "I keep wondering if I made the wrong choice." Daniel shook his head. "You didn't." She sighed. "I want to believe that, but I feel lost." He sat down across from her. "Sarah, I didn't hire you because I thought you had everything figured out. I hired you because I knew you were capable of adapting, learning, and thriving." She took a deep breath, letting his words sink in. "You don't have to be perfect," Daniel continued. "You just have to be willing to grow." Sarah took Daniel's words to heart. Instead of resisting change, she embraced it. She started listening more, asking questions, learning from her colleagues rather than trying to prove herself. She let go of the need for rigid structures and began trusting her instincts. And slowly, things began to shift. Her ideas gained traction. Her confidence grew. She started feeling like she belonged. But not everyone welcomed her with open arms. Some of Daniel's older employees weren't thrilled about her arrival. "She's too corporate," one of the senior team members muttered during a meeting. "She doesn't understand how we do things." Sarah overheard the comment. It stung. But instead of letting it shake her, she addressed it head on. "I know I come from a different world," she said at the next team meeting. "And I know change is uncomfortable, but I also know that growth comes from learning from each other. I don't want to change the company's vision. I want to help strengthen it." The room fell silent. Then, slowly, nods of approval. The resistance didn't disappear overnight, but step by step, she earned their respect. 3 months later, Sarah stood before the team, presenting a new marketing strategy. As she spoke, she felt a confidence she hadn't felt in years. Not the kind that came from job titles or external validation, but the kind that came from knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be. And for the first time in a long time, she felt truly alive. Months passed, and Sarah had fully embraced her new role. The woman who once clung to corporate security now thrived in an environment where creativity and collaboration were key. One morning, she walked into her office to find Daniel waiting for her. "I have something for you," he said, sliding an envelope across her desk. Sarah picked it up, her heart racing as she opened it. Inside was a formal offer letter. "We want to make you a partner," Daniel said with a grin. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "A partner?" she echoed, stunned. "You've done more than just fit in here, Sarah," he continued. "You've helped us grow. Your leadership, your ideas, your ability to balance strategy with heart. It's exactly what we need for the future." Tears welled in her eyes. Years ago, she had been stuck in a job that drained her. She had questioned her worth, doubted her choices. And now, here she was, being offered a place not just as an employee, but as a leader, a visionary, a partner. She looked at Daniel and smiled. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I'd love that." That night, as she sat in her apartment, reflecting on how far she had come, she realized something profound. Success wasn't about climbing a corporate ladder or chasing a paycheck. It was about fulfillment, about finding a place where her talents, values, and passions aligned. She thought back to the day she had bought a meal for a homeless man, never expecting anything in return. And now, that same man had given her something even greater than a job. He had given her purpose. Sarah's journey wasn't just about career change. It was about believing in herself, taking risks, and trusting that sometimes life had bigger plans than she could ever imagine. And so, she posed a question to herself, one she hoped others would ask too. What would happen if I stopped letting fear dictate my choices and started trusting where my heart was leading me? Because sometimes the most unexpected decisions lead to the most extraordinary destinations.